The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the National Mall in Washington, D.C., as Staff Sergeant James Cooper made his way toward the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. At 45 years old, he walked with the confident stride that came from 20 years of military service. His clean-pressed uniform and polished boots reflected his attention to detail, something the Army Rangers had drilled into him long ago. Every Thursday, without fail, Cooper would visit the memorial after finishing his shift as a security liaison at the nearby military museum. This wasn't part of his job. It was something much more personal. His father had served in Vietnam, and though he made it back home, many of his friends didn't. Cooper grew up hearing stories about these brave men, and now he carried their memory with him. The memorial was quieter at this hour. Most tourists had left for dinner, leaving only a few small groups scattered along the black granite wall. Cooper liked it better this way. The piece made it easier to focus on the names carved into the stone, over 58,000 of them. Each one represented a life given in service to their country. As he walked along the wall, Cooper noticed an elderly woman teaching her grandson how to make a pencil rubbing of a name. The boy, probably around 10, listened carefully as his grandmother explained how her brother, his great-uncle, had died saving 3 other soldiers. Cooper smiled softly, glad to see the stories being passed down to the next generation. Reaching his usual spot, Cooper stopped at panel 24W. Here, 5 names were grouped together. His father's unit, all lost on the same day except for his dad. He had memorized their stories. David Chen, the medic who loved writing letters to his sister. Mike O'Brien, the joker who could always make the unit laugh. Thomas Williams, the quiet college kid who wanted to be a teacher. Ray Martinez, the talented cook who promised to open a restaurant. And James Wilson, his father's best friend who had pushed him out of the way of an incoming grenade. Cooper reached into his cargo pocket and pulled out his maintenance kit. Even though the memorial staff kept the wall clean, he always brought supplies to ensure these particular names shined bright. Carefully, he wiped away the day's dust with a soft cloth, his movements gentle and respectful. A cool breeze rustled through the trees as Cooper worked, carrying with it the distant sounds of city traffic and chirping birds. The setting sun reflected off the polished granite, creating a mirror-like surface that seemed to connect the present with the past. In that reflection, Cooper could see himself standing among all those who had come before. He remembered his own combat experiences, 3 tours in Iraq and 2 in Afghanistan. The weight of those memories pressed against his chest, but standing here helped somehow. These men had walked the same path, carried the same burdens. They understood. Taking a step back, Cooper reached into his other pocket and pulled out 5 small American flags. It was part of his weekly ritual, 1 flag for each name. He placed them carefully at the base of the wall, making sure they stood straight and proud. As he did this, he spoke each name quietly, a soldier's prayer of remembrance. Other visitors often noticed Cooper during these moments. Some nodded respectfully as they passed, while others stopped to watch from a distance. Children would sometimes ask their parents what he was doing, leading to hushed explanations about honor and sacrifice. Cooper didn't mind. This was how history stayed alive. Finishing his task, Cooper stood at attention and raised his right hand in a crisp salute. He held it for a full minute, his stance perfect, his eyes fixed on the names before him. This wasn't required by any regulation or rule. It was simply the right thing to do. In his mind, these men were still his brothers in arms, regardless of which war they fought in. The memorial would stay open for another hour, and Cooper planned to remain until closing time. He had brought his small notebook, where he liked to write down thoughts and memories that came to him during these visits. But before he could settle onto a nearby bench, the peaceful atmosphere was suddenly broken by an unwelcome sound. The loud rumble of motorcycle engines approaching far too close to the sacred site. The peaceful evening at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial was shattered by the thunderous roar of 3 Harley-Davidson motorcycles. They weren't just passing by, they were deliberately riding straight onto the memorial walkway, their tires leaving dirty marks on the clean concrete path. The few remaining visitors looked up in shock, and a mother quickly pulled her 2 small children aside. The 3 bikers made quite a sight. The leader rode a black motorcycle with flame designs on the sides. He was a big man, probably around 50, with a thick gray beard and arms covered in faded tattoos. His leather vest was decorated with patches, some of them showing messages that weren't appropriate for a place like this. Behind him rode 2 younger men, both trying to look as tough as their leader. They stopped their bikes right in front of the memorial wall, their engines still running loudly. The noise echoed off the black granite surface, drowning out the usual peaceful sounds of birds and gentle conversation. An elderly veteran visiting the memorial shook his head in disgust and walked away, leaning heavily on his cane. "Hey, looks like we found ourselves a nice spot for a break," the leader shouted, laughing as he turned off his engine. His voice was rough and slightly slurred, suggesting he'd been drinking. He reached into his motorcycle's saddlebag and pulled out 3 cans of cheap beer, tossing them to his friends. The second biker, wearing a red bandana and missing several teeth, caught his beer and cracked it open immediately. Some of the foam sprayed onto the memorial walkway. "Sure beats that crowded bar downtown," he said, taking a long drink. The third biker, the youngest of the group with spiky black hair and a chain wallet, nodded in agreement. Several yards away, Staff Sergeant Cooper was still standing at attention, his back straight and his hand frozen in a salute. He had seen the bikers arrive in his peripheral vision, but military discipline kept him focused on completing his tribute to the fallen. Only when he finished his salute did he lower his hand and turn to face the disturbance. The bikers were making themselves comfortable, as if they were at a backyard barbecue instead of a national memorial. The leader had propped his boots up on his motorcycle's handlebars, while his friends sat on their bikes drinking. Empty beer cans already littered the ground around them, one rolling against the base of the memorial wall. Other visitors were leaving quickly, giving the rowdy group a wide berth. A young couple who had been making pencil rubbings of a relative's name packed up their materials with disappointed looks. The few remaining tourists took some final photos from a distance, more focused now on the troublemakers than the memorial itself. Cooper watched as the leader finished his beer and carelessly tossed the empty can over his shoulder. It clattered against the granite wall and fell among the fresh flowers and flags that visitors had left as tributes. The sound of aluminum hitting the memorial was like a physical blow to Cooper, each disrespectful act adding to his growing tension. The youngest biker was the first to notice Cooper standing there in his pristine uniform. He nudged his friend with the red bandana and nodded in the soldier's direction. "Check it out," he snickered. "We've got an audience." The second biker turned to look, a mocking smile spreading across his face. Their leader followed their gaze, his bloodshot eyes focusing on Cooper's military uniform and Ramrod's straight posture. A look of amusement crossed his face as he swung his legs off the handlebars and stood up, swaying slightly. He crushed his empty beer can in one meaty hand and let it drop to the ground. "Well, the leader called out, his voice carrying across the now quiet memorial grounds. "Look what we have here, boys. A real-life G.I. Joe." His friends laughed on cue, the sound echoing off the black granite walls where thousands of names stood in silent witness to the unfolding confrontation. Cooper remained motionless, his face calm but his eyes taking in every detail of the situation. 20 years of military service had taught him how to handle hostile situations, and he could tell by the biker's body language that this was about to become one. The sun was setting behind the memorial now, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch between the two groups like lines being drawn in the sand. The leader of the bikers took his time walking towards Staff Sergeant Cooper, intentionally stepping over the American flags and flowers that visitors had left at the memorial's base. His heavy boots made loud thuds against the concrete, each step slow and deliberate. Behind him, his two friends exchanged excited glances, expecting some entertainment. Cooper remained perfectly still, his face showing no emotion. His years of training as an Army Ranger had taught him to read situations like this carefully. He noticed how the leader's left foot dragged slightly, probably an old injury. He saw the slight tremor in the man's hands, the effect of too much alcohol. Every detail could matter if things went wrong. "What's the matter, soldier boy?" the biker called out, his voice getting louder as he got closer. "Don't like sharing your special wool with regular folks like us." He stopped about 3 feet from Cooper, close enough that the soldier could smell the cheap beer on his breath. The biker was taller by a few inches and outweighed Cooper by at least 50 pounds, but he didn't seem to notice that the soldier's calm stance was that of someone very capable of handling himself. The two younger bikers had climbed off their motorcycles now and were moving to either side, trying to surround Cooper. The one with the red bandana was grinning, showing his missing teeth, while the one with spiky hair kept looking around nervously, maybe starting to realize they might be making a mistake. A small crowd had gathered at a safe distance. Some people were filming with their phones, while others were talking urgently into them, probably calling security. An older veteran who had been visiting the memorial was explaining something to his grandson in hushed tones, pointing at Cooper's rank insignia and combat patches. "You know," the biker leader said, reaching out to flick Cooper's name tape with his finger, "when I was your age, I thought about joining up. But I don't take orders from nobody." He laughed at his own words, and his friends joined in. The sound echoed off the black granite wall, seeming to disturb the thousands of names etched there. Cooper's eyes flickered briefly to the wall behind the bikers. In the fading sunlight, he could still make out the names he had come to honor. His father's voice echoed in his memory. "Sometimes the hardest battles are fought right here at home, son." Those words had never seemed more true than at this moment. The biker with spiky hair had picked up another beer can and was about to open it when Cooper finally spoke. His voice was quiet but clear, carrying the authority of someone used to being listened to. "Sir, I need you to take a look behind you." Surprised by the calm request, the biker leader turned his head slightly. Cooper continued, "Those names on that wall. They died so you had the right to act exactly like you're acting right now. But they'd also die believing in something bigger than themselves. Something about respect, about honor." The leader's face reddened. He wasn't used to being spoken to this way. "Are you trying to lecture me, boy?" he growled, stepping even closer to Cooper. Their faces were only inches apart now, "because I don't think you understand who you're dealing with." Cooper didn't step back. His eyes remained locked with the bikers as he replied, "Actually, sir, I don't think you understand who you're dealing with. You see that badge on my shoulder? I'm not just a soldier. I'm liaison security for the National Mall, and you're currently desecrating a federal monument." The biker's bloodshot eyes darted to Cooper's shoulder, finally noticing the special security badge there. For the first time, uncertainty flashed across his face. His two friends had also spotted the badge, and the younger one with spiky hair took a step back. But alcohol and pride are a dangerous combination. The leader's face twisted into an angry snarl as he raised his hand, pointing his finger directly at Cooper's chest. "Listen here, you pompous little." He never finished his sentence, because what happened next would become a story that regular visitors to the memorial would tell for months to come. Time seemed to slow down as the biker's finger jabbed toward Cooper's chest. The soldier moved with the fluid precision that came from years of combat training. His right hand shot up, catching the biker's extended finger at the perfect angle. In the same smooth motion, his left hand gripped the man's wrist, applying just enough pressure to the nerve points. The biker leader's eyes widened in surprise as he found himself suddenly off balance. His knees started to bend against his will, his body responding to the precise pressure Cooper was applying. The two younger bikers froze in place, their mouths hanging open as they watched their tough leader being controlled by such a simple-looking hold. "Now then," Cooper said calmly, as if they were having a normal conversation, "let's talk about proper behavior at a war memorial." His voice remained professional and controlled, just loud enough for the nearby visitors to hear. The gathered crowd had grown larger, with several people recording the scene on their phones. The biker tried to pull away, but Cooper adjusted his grip slightly, causing the man to gasp. Sweat began to form on the biker's forehead as he realized he was completely at the mercy of this soldier who hadn't even raised his voice. Behind him, his two friends looked at each other uncertainly, neither willing to make the first move. "First," Cooper continued, maintaining the hold, "those motorcycles need to be moved off the memorial grounds. They're leaking oil onto the concrete, and that's disrespectful." He glanced at the two younger bikers. "Would you gentlemen mind taking care of that right now?" The biker with spiky hair nodded quickly and started walking backward toward his motorcycle. His friend with the red bandana hesitated for a moment, then followed. They both seemed relieved to have a reason to step away from the confrontation. Cooper turned his attention back to the leader, who was now sweating heavily and breathing hard. "Second, all those beer cans you threw around need to be picked up. Every single one of them. I'm sure your friends will help you with that once they've moved the bikes." The sound of motorcycles starting up filled the air as the two younger bikers carefully rode their machines off the memorial walkway and onto the proper parking area. They killed the engines and stood awkwardly by their bikes, watching their leader's predicament. "Third," Cooper said, his voice taking on a more serious tone, "you're going to apologize to everyone here. To the veterans who came to pay their respects, to the families teaching their children about sacrifice, and most importantly, to those names on that wall. The biker leader's face had turned from red to pale. The alcohol in his system was making it hard for him to process how quickly the situation had turned against him. His tough guy image was crumbling in front of everyone, and he knew it. Nearby, the older veteran who had been watching with his grandson whispered something to the boy, who nodded with wide eyes. Other visitors had started to gather closer, sensing that the danger had passed. Some were nodding in approval at Cooper's handling of the situation. "If I let go of your hand," Cooper said quietly, "are we going to have any more problems?" He maintained eye contact with the biker, his grip neither increasing nor decreasing. It was the same steady pressure that had controlled the situation from the start. The biker leader tried to maintain some dignity as he muttered, "No, no problems." His voice had lost all its previous swagger and threat. Behind him, his friends had already started picking up the scattered beer cans, eager to show they were cooperating. Cooper nodded and slowly released his hold. The biker straightened up, rubbing his wrist and finger, looking much smaller than he had just minutes before. His face showed a mix of embarrassment, anger, and, most importantly, respect. But before anyone could say anything else, the distinct sound of police sirens could be heard approaching the memorial. Cooper reached for the radio on his shoulder, keeping his eyes on the biker leader. "This next part," he said professionally, "is going to involve some paperwork." The sound of approaching police sirens seemed to wake something up in the biker leader. Maybe it was the alcohol clouding his judgment, or perhaps it was his wounded pride in front of the growing crowd, but his face suddenly twisted with rage. He lunged forward, throwing a wild punch at Cooper's face. Cooper had been expecting something like this. 20 years in the military had taught him that wounded pride often led to desperate actions. He easily stepped aside from the punch, letting the biker's momentum carry him forward. In one smooth motion, Cooper gripped the man's extended arm and used his own weight against him. The crowd gasped as the large biker found himself face down on the concrete, his arm locked behind his back. Cooper's knee was planted firmly in the center of his back, applying just enough pressure to keep him still without causing injury. The whole takedown had happened so fast that many visitors were still raising their phones to record. "That was a poor decision, sir," Cooper said calmly, his breathing steady as if he had just taken a casual walk. "Now we have to add assaulting a federal officer to your charges." He glanced up at the two younger bikers, who had taken several steps back, their faces pale with shock. The biker with the red bandana raised his hands. "Hey man, we don't want any trouble," he said quickly. "Billy just had too much to drink, that's all. He doesn't usually act like this." The one with spiky hair nodded frantically in agreement, still clutching the beer cans they had been picking up. Cooper noticed that the evening sun was casting their shadows long across the memorial wall. The names of fallen soldiers seemed to watch the scene unfold, their sacrifice a silent witness to this moment. The irony wasn't lost on him. These men had died protecting the very freedoms that allowed people like this biker to act so disrespectfully. Two parked police cars pulled up to the memorial, their lights flashing but sirens now silent. 4 officers stepped out, quickly taking in the scene. They recognized Cooper immediately. He had worked with them many times before during his security duties at the memorial. "Evening, Sergeant Cooper," the lead officer called out as they approached. "Looks like you've had an interesting shift." His hand rested casually on his holstered weapon as he surveyed the situation. The pinned biker, the scattered beer cans, and the 2 nervous accomplices. The biker leader, Billy, had stopped struggling under Cooper's hold. The cold concrete against his face seemed to have finally sobered him up enough to realize just how much trouble he was in. His alcohol-induced courage had evaporated, replaced by the dawning understanding of the consequences of his actions. These gentlemen decided to have an impromptu party at the memorial, Cooper explained professionally. When asked to leave, this one thought it would be a good idea to take a swing at me. He maintained his hold but kept his voice neutral, treating it like any other incident report. The older veteran who had been watching with his grandson approached one of the officers. "I got it all on video," he offered, holding up his phone. The soldier here gave them every chance to leave peacefully. Several other visitors nodded in agreement, some also indicating they had recorded the incident. The park police officers moved in to take control of the situation. As they handcuffed Billy, Cooper stepped back, straightening his uniform with practiced precision. The 2 younger bikers were also being detained, their earlier bravado completely gone as they were patted down and questioned. A small group of Korean tourists who had witnessed everything were talking excitedly among themselves, pointing respectfully at Cooper. One of them, an elderly man wearing a veteran's cap from his own military service, gave Cooper a formal bow. The soldier returned it with equal respect, understanding that some languages of honor needed no translation. The evening air had grown cooler, and the memorial lights were starting to come on, illuminating the wall of names. Cooper looked at his watch, realizing his regular Thursday visit had turned into something quite different from his usual quiet reflection. But in a way, he had still honored the memory of those names on the wall by protecting the dignity of their resting place. The park police officers efficiently processed the scene, their movements practiced and professional. Officer Martinez, the lead officer, sat at a nearby bench with his notepad, taking Cooper's official statement. The memorial grounds had become oddly quiet, with only the sound of police radios and the distant city traffic breaking the evening silence. "So you were conducting your regular memorial visit when they arrived?" Martinez asked, his pen moving quickly across the paper. He had known Cooper for 3 years now, ever since the soldier had started his liaison position at the memorial. They had dealt with troublemakers before, but nothing quite like this. Cooper nodded, his posture remaining straight even while seated. Affirmative. They entered the memorial grounds on their motorcycles at approximately 1847 hours. Initial behavior included consuming alcohol, littering, and deliberately disrespecting memorial property. His military training showed in the precise way he reported the incident. Nearby, 2 other officers were questioning the younger bikers, who couldn't seem to stop talking. Their earlier tough guy act had completely disappeared, replaced by nervous energy and a desperate desire to cooperate. The one with spiky hair was explaining how they had just met Billy at a bar earlier that day. "We didn't know he was going to act crazy like that," the red bandana biker kept saying, his missing teeth making his words slightly slurred. "We thought we were just going to cruise around the city, you know? Then he started drinking more and more." Billy himself sat in the back of a police car, his face a mix of anger and embarrassment. The handcuffs seemed to have finally convinced him that his actions had real consequences. Through the car window, he watched as a maintenance crew arrived to clean up the oil spots his motorcycle had left on the memorial walkway. A small crowd of visitors still lingered at a respectful distance, watching the scene unfold. The older veteran and his grandson had finished giving their witness statements and were now showing their video of the incident to another officer. The Korean tourists had also stayed, their elderly veteran taking photos with his group while occasionally nodding respectfully toward Cooper. "What made you choose to handle it physically?" Officer Martinez asked, looking up from his notepad. It wasn't a challenging question. He knew Cooper's training and reputation, but it needed to be in the report. Cooper straightened his uniform sleeve before answering. The subject displayed clear signs of intoxication and aggressive behavior. When verbal commands were ineffective, and he initiated physical contact, I used the minimum force necessary to control the situation and prevent escalation. Martinez smiled slightly as he wrote. He had seen the video. Cooper's minimum force had been impressive in its efficiency. The hold he had used on Billy's finger had already become a topic of conversation among the other officers. The memorial lights were fully on now, creating a solemn glow across the black granite wall. A Park Service maintenance worker was carefully replacing some of the flowers and flags that had been disturbed during the incident. Cooper watched him work, appreciating the care he took in restoring the memorial's dignity. "We'll need you to come down to the station tomorrow to sign the official paperwork," Martinez said, closing his notepad. "The assault on a federal officer charge is serious. The U.S. Attorney's Office will probably want to talk to you as well." Cooper nodded, his mind already thinking about how this would affect his schedule. He had training exercises planned with new security staff tomorrow, but this took priority. "I'll be there first thing in the morning, sir." A tow truck had arrived to remove the motorcycles, its yellow lights casting strange shadows across the memorial grounds. The 2 younger bikers watched miserably as their bikes were loaded up. They would be held as evidence until the legal proceedings were completed. The Korean veteran approached Cooper one last time, offering a crisp military salute. Cooper returned it with equal precision, the gesture transcending their different backgrounds and ages. The old soldier spoke briefly in Korean, and though Cooper didn't understand the words, the tone of gratitude and respect was clear. As the police began to wrap up their work, Cooper looked back at the wall of names. The evening had turned out very differently from his usual quiet visits, but somehow he felt he had served these fallen heroes just as well today. Sometimes, he thought, protecting their memory meant taking direct action. The next morning dawned bright and clear over Washington. D.C. Staff Sergeant Cooper arrived at the Park Police Station exactly 15 minutes early, his uniform as crisp as ever. The events of the previous evening had already become a popular topic among the station's morning shift officers. Officer Martinez met him in the lobby, carrying a thick folder of paperwork. "Morning, Sergeant," he said, gesturing toward an interview room. "You're not going to believe this, but our friend Billy has quite a history." He laid out several printed pages showing previous arrests and complaints. Cooper sat down at the small table, his posture naturally straight. The interview room was simple. Just a table, 4 chairs, and a large window looking out at the parking lot. On the wall hung the familiar poster showing various National Mall monuments, including the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. "Turns out he's been causing trouble at military memorials across the country," Martinez explained, spreading out the papers. 3 incidents at Arlington National Cemetery, 2 at the World War II Memorial, and 1 at the Korean War Veterans Memorial, but no one ever managed to catch him in the act before. The photos from previous incidents showed the same pattern: motorcycle tracks, beer cans, and disrupted memorial sites. In each case, Billy and his changing group of friends had managed to leave before authorities arrived. The sergeant studied each report carefully, his face showing no emotion. Outside the interview room, they could hear excited voices. The video of yesterday's incident had spread quickly on social media. Several news stations had already called the police station asking for details, and veteran groups across the country were sharing the story online. "The U.S. Attorney's Office is very interested in this case," Martinez continued, pulling out more documents. "They want to make an example of it. Disrespecting national memorials has become a bigger problem lately, and they think this might help discourage others." Cooper nodded, remembering his own father's stories about people disrespecting the Vietnam Memorial when it was first built. Some wounds took generations to heal, and some people never learned the meaning of respect. But that didn't mean they shouldn't face consequences for their actions. The door opened, and a woman in a sharp business suit entered. "Sergeant Cooper, I'm Sarah Chen from the U.S. Attorney's Office," she said, extending her hand. "We're taking this case very seriously." She sat down and opened her laptop, ready to add his testimony to the federal case. For the next hour, Cooper detailed everything that had happened. His military training showed in the precise way he described each event, each action, and each decision he had made. Ms. Chen typed quickly, occasionally asking for clarification, but mostly just letting him tell the story. "The best part," Martinez added with a slight smile, "is that Billy's 2 friends have agreed to testify against him. They're both on probation for minor offenses and don't want to risk jail time. They've given us details about his other memorial visits, too." Through the window, Cooper could see more police cars arriving. The morning shift was changing, and several officers stopped to look into the interview room, curious to see the soldier who had handled the situation so professionally. Some gave respectful nods as they passed by. Ms. Chen finished typing and looked up from her laptop. "We're pushing for the maximum penalty under the federal laws protecting national monuments. With his prior history and the assault charge, he's looking at significant jail time and heavy fines." Cooper thought about the names on the memorial wall, about what they had sacrificed, and about what they would think of all this. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "I hope the court will consider requiring him to learn about the people honored at these memorials. Maybe understanding their sacrifices would help more than just punishment." The prosecutor looked surprised for a moment, then smiled. "That's actually an excellent suggestion, Sergeant. Community service at the memorials, combined with educational programs about their significance. I'll definitely include that in our recommendations to the judge." As they finished the paperwork, Martinez's radio crackled with reports of the day's activities beginning at the National Mall. Soon, Cooper would return to his regular duties, helping to protect and preserve the dignity of these sacred places. But this time, he had done more than just stand guard. He had shown that disrespecting these memorials carried real consequences. 3 months had passed since the incident at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. The early autumn evening was cool and peaceful as Staff Sergeant Cooper made his regular Thursday visit. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, casting a warm glow on the black granite wall. This time, however, he wasn't alone. Behind him stood Billy, a former biker leader, wearing clean work clothes with a National Park Service volunteer badge. Part of his sentence had included 500 hours of community service at various war memorials, combined with educational programs about military history and sacrifice. These 5 names, Cooper explained, pointing to the section of wall he visited each week. They were in my father's unit in Vietnam. Every one of them had a story, a family, and dreams for the future. His voice was calm and professional, continuing the educational part of Billy's rehabilitation. Billy nodded silently, his earlier arrogance completely gone. The past 3 months of working at the memorial had changed him. He had spent hours cleaning the grounds, helping elderly veterans find names on the wall, and learning about the people remembered here. Each day had chipped away at his old attitudes. David Chen was a medic, Cooper continued, touching one of the names. He saved 12 men before a sniper got him. Mike O'Brien was the unit's joker, kept everyone's spirits up during the worst times. He died protecting a village of civilians. Billy listened intently, taking notes in a small notebook as part of his required learning. Nearby, a group of school children on a field trip watched curiously. Their teacher had recognized Cooper from the viral video of the incident, which had now been viewed millions of times. She used it in her classes as an example of standing up for what's right while maintaining professionalism and dignity. The hardest part, Billy said quietly, looking at his reflection in the polished granite, is seeing the families come here. Watching them touch the names, leave flowers, cry. I never understood before. Never wanted to understand. His voice carried the weight of genuine regret. Cooper looked at him thoughtfully. Over the past months, he had watched Billy's transformation from a disrespectful troublemaker into someone who began to grasp the meaning of this place. It wasn't just about punishment, it was about learning and growing. A young veteran in a wheelchair approached them, accompanied by his service dog. Billy immediately moved to help him navigate the path, something that would have been unthinkable 3 months ago. The veteran smiled in thanks, then recognized Cooper from the incident video and gave him a respectful salute. You know, Billy said after helping the veteran, my own father served in Vietnam. We never talked about it. I guess I was angry about that, about him being so distant. But being here, learning about what they went through. He trailed off, emotion catching in his throat. Cooper nodded understanding. Many families had been affected by the war in ways that echoed through generations. Sometimes, healing started in unexpected ways. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his usual 5 small American flags. Would you like to help me place these? Cooper asked, holding out 2 of the flags to Billy. It was a significant gesture. Cooper had never shared this personal ritual with anyone before. Billy carefully took the flags, handling them with newfound respect. Together, they placed the flags at the base of the wall, one for each name from Cooper's father's unit. The setting sun caught the metal poles, making them shine against the dark granite. Other visitors stopped to watch, recognizing the solemn nature of the moment. Your community service here is almost finished, Cooper said as they stepped back from the wall. But these names, these stories, they'll stay with you. It wasn't a question. He had seen the change in Billy over the months, watching anger and disrespect transform into understanding and honor. Billy looked at his reflection in the wall one more time, seeing himself superimposed over the thousands of names. I'll keep coming back, he said quietly. There's still so much to learn, so many stories to remember. He touched his volunteer badge, then added, and maybe I can help others understand too. As darkness fell and the memorial lights came on, Cooper and Billy stood in respectful silence before the wall. Behind them, the endless stream of visitors continued, each coming to find their own connection to this place of memory and honor. Sometimes, Cooper thought, the greatest victories weren't won in battle, but in the quiet moments when understanding finally took root in unexpected places.